My name is Caroline. I'm 28 years old, and I never expected 4 words to change my life forever. You're dead to me. My mother said it at Christmas dinner, her voice sharp enough to slice through the festive atmosphere. Those words froze everyone at the table, including me. That night, I quietly cut all ties with her, a decision that seemed impossible just hours before. What followed shocked not just my mother, but my entire family. Before I share my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members. Trust me, this journey might help you more than you know. I grew up in a middle-class suburban home in Rochester Hills, Michigan, with neatly trimmed lawns and neighbors who wave from their driveways. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. But inside our home, tension always simmered beneath the surface. My parents. Martha and Richard divorced when I was 12 years old, a culmination of years of arguments behind closed doors and icy silences at the dinner table. After the divorce, my father moved out, eventually relocating to California. When I was 15, he remarried a woman named Diane, gained 2 stepchildren, and started a new life 3,000 miles away. We had phone calls on birthdays and a week together during summer breaks, but with each passing year, his voice grew more unfamiliar, and the gaps between our conversations stretched longer. My mother, Martha, retained primary custody of me and my younger sister, Heather. From the earliest days I can remember, it was clear that Martha and I had a complex relationship. Where my sister seemed to naturally please our mother with her quiet compliance and social graces, I was always slightly off key in the symphony Martha was trying to conduct. "Caroline, stand up straight. No one likes a sloucher," she would say while Heather received praise for her natural poise. "Caroline, did you really think that outfit was appropriate?" was a common question when I came downstairs, while Heather's fashion choices earned approving nods. The inequality wasn't subtle. When I was 9, I spent weeks working on an art project for school, a papier-mâché solar system that I was incredibly proud of. I'd stayed up late finishing it, my fingers stained with paint and glue. When I showed it to my mother, her lips tightened. "It's so messy, Caroline. The planets aren't even properly aligned. Is this really your best work?" She picked it up, examined it from different angles, then sighed heavily. "I just don't understand why you can't be more careful like your sister." Later that evening, I found my project in the trash, one of the planets crushed. When I confronted my mother, she simply said, "It wasn't good enough to turn in. You can start over and do better this time." I got an A on my second attempt, but the joy had been extracted from the process. This pattern repeated itself throughout my childhood. When I brought home a report card with all A's and 1 B, Martha zeroed in on the B. "What happened here? Didn't you study enough?" Meanwhile, Heather's report card with several B's received praise for improvement. As I entered my teenage years, Martha's criticism expanded to include my weight, my friends, and my interests. "You've put on weight, Caroline. Boys don't like chubby girls." Or, "Why do you spend so much time reading those books? You should be more social like Heather." The message was clear: I was fundamentally flawed, while Heather was the golden standard. But despite the constant criticism, I still desperately wanted my mother's approval. I became a perfectionist, meticulously checking my work, my appearance, my words before presenting them to her scrutinizing gaze. I became a people pleaser, sacrificing my own preferences to avoid conflict. And I learned to hide parts of myself that might trigger her disapproval. In high school, I was drawn to theater and art, but Martha discouraged these impractical interests. "Focus on something that will get you a real job, Caroline. Not everyone can afford to chase pipe dreams." So I joined debate club and aimed for a business degree, even though numbers made my eyes glaze over, and public speaking gave me anxiety attacks in bathroom stalls before competitions. Despite everything, I excelled academically. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class and earned a scholarship to the University of Michigan. Martha attended my graduation ceremony, of course. "The speech was a bit long," she commented afterward, "and that hair color isn't doing you any favors." College provided some distance, both physically and emotionally. I lived in the dorms then, in an apartment with friends. I switched my major from business to communications after a panic attack during an accounting final. I called Martha to tell her. "Well, I suppose that's better than art," she said with a sigh. But don't come crying to me when you can't find a job. I graduated with honors and found a position at a marketing firm in Detroit. Martha attended this graduation too, her smile tight as she introduced herself to my professors. Caroline always was stubborn, she told my faculty advisor. But she gets there eventually. Through it all, I still sought her approval. Every achievement, every milestone was presented to her like an offering, hoping this would be the one to finally earn her unconditional love. Every holiday, every birthday, I showed up at her house hoping this would be the time she would see me, really see me, and be proud of who I had become. But no matter what I accomplished, it was never enough. And I was about to learn just how conditional her love truly was. The real turning point in my relationship with my mother came when I was 26. I had been working at the marketing firm for 4 years and had recently been promoted to senior copywriter. I had my own apartment in a trendy part of Detroit, a small but loyal circle of friends, and was finally starting to feel comfortable in my own skin. That's when I met Daniel at a charity art auction my firm was handling the publicity for. He was one of the featured artists, a tall man with warm brown eyes and paint-stained fingers. His installation piece, combining photography and sculpture, had drawn me in, and when he caught me studying it for the third time, he approached. "I'm curious what you see in it," he said, his voice gentle with a slight accent I couldn't place. We talked for over an hour, standing in front of his artwork, while the crowd ebbed and flowed around us. He was Iranian-American, born in the U.S., to parents who had immigrated just before the revolution. His art explored themes of cultural identity, belonging, and the spaces between worlds. By the end of the night, he had my number, and I was already imagining seeing him again. Our relationship developed quickly. Daniel was different from anyone I had ever dated. He was thoughtful and perceptive, noticing things about me that I had never voiced aloud. He was patient when my people-pleasing tendencies emerged, gently encouraging me to express what I truly wanted, rather than what I thought would make others happy. And he was creative in a way that awakened the artistic interests I had suppressed for so long. For the first 3 months, I didn't tell my mother about Daniel. Some protective instinct kept me from sharing this new happiness with her. But when he asked to meet my family, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I invited Martha to lunch at a neutral location, a cafe she approved of in Birmingham. She arrived exactly on time, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless as always. "You look tired," were her first words to me. "Are you getting enough sleep?" I took a deep breath. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that I'm seeing someone. His name is Daniel, and it's getting serious." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Daniel what?" Daniel Amati." The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a slight tightening around the mouth, a coolness in her eyes. "And what does Daniel do?" "He's an artist, a very successful one. He has installations in several major galleries, and he teaches at the Art Institute." Martha took a slow sip of her water. "An artist? I see." She set the glass down carefully. "And where is he from?" "That's not a local name." "He was born here, but his parents are from Iran." The coolness in her eyes turned to ice. "Iran. Caroline, are you serious? Do you have any idea what you're getting involved with?" I felt my chest tighten, the familiar anxiety of disappointing her rising like a tide. But alongside it was something new, indignation. "Yes, Mom, I'm serious. Daniel is kind, thoughtful, and talented. His parents are lovely people who have lived in this country for over 40 years. "I'm sure they're very nice," she said, her tone making it clear she thought the opposite. "But have you considered the complications, the cultural differences? What about children? Will they be raised Muslim? Daniel isn't particularly religious, and neither am I. If we have children someday, we'll figure it out together." I was surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Martha leaned forward. "Caroline, I'm just concerned for you. You've always been idealistic, but marriage is hard enough without adding these kinds of complications. And an artist. How will he provide for you, for a family?" For the first time in my life, I felt myself truly stand up to my mother. "Daniel's work sells for more than I make in 3 months, Mom. He owns his loft outright. And even if he were struggling, I have my own career. I can provide for myself." The lunch deteriorated from there. Martha brought up terrorism, cultural incompatibility, and even suggested that Daniel might be using me for a green card, despite my repeated clarification that he was an American citizen. By the time the check came, we were sitting in rigid silence. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Martha tried one more tactic. Just promise me you'll think about what I've said. There are so many nice men out there who would be more suitable. I looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted inside me. I have thought about it, Mom. Daniel makes me happy. He makes me feel valued and seen. Isn't that what you should want for me? She didn't answer, just pressed her lips together and walked to her car. The months that followed were tense. Martha would call and carefully avoid mentioning Daniel, as if by not speaking of him, she could erase his existence from my life. When I brought him up, she would change the subject or find an excuse to end the call. Heather, now living in Chicago with her boyfriend Tyler, warned me during our weekly sister calls. Mom's on the warpath about this guy Carr. She called me ranting about how you're throwing your life away. Despite the tension, Daniel and I grew closer. He understood family pressure. His own parents had initially hoped he would become a doctor or engineer rather than an artist. But they came around, he told me. They saw that art was my passion, and eventually they saw that I could succeed at it. 8 months into our relationship, on a snowy evening at Belle Isle Park, Daniel proposed. He had created a small sculpture of two hands intertwined, cast in bronze with a ring nestled in the center. "These are our hands," he said softly. "I made a cast of them while you were sleeping last month." The detail was exquisite, right down to the small scar on my index finger from a childhood accident. "Will you build a life with me, Caroline?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the winter lights around us. I said yes without hesitation. I called my mother the next day. When she answered, I dove right in, not giving myself time to lose courage. "Mom, Daniel proposed last night and I accepted. We're getting married." The silence on the other end stretched for so long that I checked to see if the call had dropped. "Mom, are you there?" "I heard you." Her voice was distant, controlled. "I assume you've made up your mind." "Yes, I have." Another long pause. "Well, I hope you won't rush into anything. A long engagement would be sensible." It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for, but it wasn't as bad as I had feared. "We're thinking next fall." "I see. We can discuss it when you come for Christmas." Christmas. The holiday was just 3 weeks away. It would be the first time Daniel would meet my extended family, and the first major holiday since our engagement. I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope as I hung up the phone. Perhaps the festive spirit would soften my mother's heart. Perhaps seeing Daniel interact with the family would help her accept him. Daniel was optimistic too. "Families are complicated," he said as we shopped for gifts. "But it's important to try. I want to know your family, and I want them to know me." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. "Just be prepared. My mother can be challenging." What I didn't say was that I was planning to make a formal announcement of our engagement at Christmas dinner, hoping that the presence of aunts, uncles, and cousins would pressure Martha into at least a show of support. Looking back, I realized I was setting the stage for confrontation, though I wouldn't have admitted it at the time. As Christmas approached, my anxiety grew. I had nightmares about Martha publicly rejecting Daniel, about holiday decorations bursting into flames, about being a child again, and having my carefully made presents thrown away for not being good enough. Daniel held me through the restless nights, his steady presence a reminder of why this tension was worth enduring. The day before Christmas Eve, we drove from Detroit to Rochester Hills, where Martha still lived in the house I had grown up in. My stomach was in knots as we pulled into the driveway. "Ready?" Daniel asked, giving my hand a squeeze. I nodded, though I wasn't ready at all. I had no idea that I was about to experience the most painful and ultimately liberating Christmas of my life. Martha's house was exactly as I remembered it, immaculately decorated for the holidays, with a color-coordinated tree in the front window, and a wreath on the door that matched the burgundy and gold theme. Every year she chose a different holiday color scheme, and every decoration had to align perfectly with her vision. Daniel whistled softly as we approached the front door. "It looks like a magazine cover." "That's the goal," I said, reaching for the doorbell with a slightly trembling hand. Martha opened the door, her expression carefully neutral as she took us in. She was wearing a burgundy sweater that complemented the decor, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist. "Caroline, right on time." She turned to Daniel with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be Daniel. Welcome. Daniel, ever gracious, extended his hand. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Walker. Your home is beautiful. Martha shook his hand briefly. Thank you. Please come in out of the cold. We stepped into the foyer where I helped Daniel with his coat. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the familiar scent of my childhood Christmases. For a moment, nostalgia hit me so strongly that I almost forgot the tension of the situation. Then I heard my sister's voice. Car, you made it! Heather bounded down the hallway, her face bright with genuine joy. At 24, she was still the golden child, but our relationship had improved significantly since we had both left home. She threw her arms around me in a tight hug, then turned to Daniel with open curiosity. So you're the famous Daniel. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope, Daniel said with a warm smile. Heather linked her arm with his. Let me introduce you to everyone. Tyler's already been through the gauntlet, so he can show you the ropes. She led Daniel toward the living room, throwing a meaningful glance back at me. I understood her silent message. She was giving me a moment alone with our mother. Martha was arranging a platter of appetizers, her movements precise and controlled. I took a deep breath. Thanks for including Daniel, Mom. It means a lot to me. She didn't look up. Of course. He's important to you. It was the most acknowledgement she had given our relationship since I had announced the engagement. I felt a small flicker of hope. He is. I think if you give him a chance, you'll see why. Martha finally met my eyes. I am giving him a chance, Caroline. He's here, isn't he? She handed me the platter. Take this to the living room, please. Your Aunt Linda just arrived. The living room was filling with extended family. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, had brought her new husband, a jovial man named Frank, who was already helping himself to the eggnog. Uncle Robert, my mother's brother, sat in the corner with his wife Alice, watching their teenage daughters show each other something on their phones. Cousin Megan and her husband David arrived shortly after, their toddler in tow, adding a chaotic energy to the otherwise controlled environment. I scanned the room for Daniel and found him deep in conversation with Tyler, Heather's boyfriend of 2 years. Tyler was exactly the kind of man Martha approved of. From a good family in Grosse Pointe, working in finance with a country club membership and plans for a traditional career trajectory. Daniel, with his paint-stained jeans, carefully covered by dress pants, and his artistic sensibilities, was Tyler's polar opposite. Yet as I watched them talk, I could see Tyler genuinely engaged, leaning forward to hear Daniel explain something. It struck me then how easily Daniel could connect with people, how his warmth and authenticity drew others in. Everyone except my mother, apparently. Dinner was served at exactly 7 o'clock. Martha's timing impeccable as always. We gathered around the dining room table, which had been extended to accommodate all 14 of us. The table setting was magazine-worthy, with the good china crystal glasses and silverware that only appeared on special occasions. Martha had arranged the seating with careful consideration. Heather and Tyler were seated to her right, while I was placed further down the table with Daniel beside me. It was a subtle message, but one I recognized immediately. Heather and Tyler were at the place of honor, while Daniel and I were relegated to the periphery. The first courses passed without incident. Martha had prepared her traditional Christmas menu, butternut squash soup followed by a winter salad with cranberries and walnuts. The conversation flowed around general topics: Cousin Megan's toddler's first steps, Uncle Robert's recent promotion, Aunt Linda's honeymoon in Barbados. It was during the main course, as plates of perfectly roasted turkey, maple-glazed carrots, and garlic mashed potatoes were being passed around, that Martha turned her attention to Heather and Tyler. Tyler, Heather tells me you're being considered for the Anderson account at the firm. That's quite an accomplishment for someone your age. Tyler, a sandy-haired man with a perpetual look of earnestness, nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Walker. It's a big opportunity. Martha beamed. And I understand you two have been looking at houses in Bloomfield Hills. Heather nodded, casting a slightly apologetic glance my way. We've seen a few properties. Nothing definite yet. Well, it's never too early to start planning, Martha said, especially with the next logical steps in your future. A house, marriage, children. She let the statement hang in the air, her implication clear. I felt Daniel's hand find mine under the table, a gentle squeeze of support. Taking a deep breath, I decided this was as good a moment as any for our announcement. Speaking of marriage, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Daniel and I have some news. The table quieted, all eyes turning toward us. I lifted our clasped hands to show the ring on my finger. We're engaged. We're planning a fall wedding next year. For a moment, there was silence. Then Aunt Linda broke into a wide smile. "Oh, how wonderful! Congratulations, you two!" Her genuine enthusiasm seemed to break the ice. Cousin Megan asked to see the ring, Uncle Robert offered a toast, and even Tyler gave Daniel a friendly clap on the shoulder. Only Martha remained silent, her face a careful mask as she cut her turkey into precise pieces. "Mom," I prompted quietly, "aren't you going to say anything?" Martha set down her knife and fork with deliberate care. "I believe I've already expressed my thoughts on this matter privately, Caroline." The table's festive atmosphere dimmed slightly at her cool tone. Aunt Linda, always the peacemaker, jumped in. "Oh, Martha, you must be thrilled. Both your girls settling down with such accomplished young men." Martha's smile was tight. "Of course I want Caroline to be happy. I just hope she's considered all aspects of such an important decision." Daniel, sensing the tension, spoke up. "Mrs. Walker, I understand your concerns. Any parent would want to make sure their child is making the right choice. I can only say that I love Caroline deeply, and I'm committed to building a good life with her." It was a perfect response, respectful, acknowledging her position as a parent, yet firm in his commitment to me. I felt a surge of love for him, for his grace under pressure. Martha's expression didn't change. Love is important, of course, but practical considerations matter too. Cultural compatibility, financial stability, shared values about family and children. Daniel nodded. "Absolutely. Caroline and I have discussed all of those things extensively." "Have you?" Martha's gaze shifted to me. "And what about children, Caroline? Have you discussed how they'll be raised? What religions they'll be taught? What holidays they'll celebrate?" The table had gone uncomfortably quiet. I could feel everyone watching, waiting for my response. "Yes, Mom, we have. We plan to honor both our backgrounds and create our own traditions as a family." Martha laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "How modern! And when your children are confused about their identity, when they don't fit in anywhere?" Daniel stiffened beside me, but his voice remained calm. "With respect, Mrs. Walker, many families successfully navigate multiple cultural backgrounds. My own parents have done so for over 40 years. It takes work and understanding, but it can be beautiful." "Beautiful for whom?" Martha countered. "Certainly not for the children caught in the middle." I felt a flash of anger. "Mom, that's enough. Daniel and I are getting married. We've made our decision." "And what a decision it is," Martha said, her voice taking on an edge I recognized from childhood confrontations. "Throwing away everything I've tried to teach you, everything I've wanted for you for some artistic fantasy." The table was dead silent now. Aunt Linda looked mortified, Uncle Robert was studying his plate with intense concentration, and Heather was shooting me warning glances. "Mom," I said quietly, "can we please not do this here? It's Christmas." "Yes, it's Christmas," Martha agreed. "A time for family, a time for honoring traditions and values, not for announcing that you're rejecting everything I stand for." "I'm not rejecting anything," I protested. "I'm making my own choices as an adult. That's what you raised me to do." Martha's laugh was bitter. "I raised you to be sensible, to value stability and security, to make choices that would reflect well on this family." The familiar shame began to creep up my neck, but I pushed it back down. "I'm marrying Daniel because I love him and we're good together. That's the only reason that matters." "Love," Martha said dismissively. "Love doesn't pay bills or navigate social situations or raise children properly." Daniel spoke up again, his voice still measured but with an underlying firmness. "Mrs. Walker, I understand your concern for Caroline, but I assure you I can provide for her financially, emotionally, and in every other way that matters." Martha's gaze cut to him sharp as a blade. "And who are you to make such assurances? An artist with foreign roots and radical ideas about creating your own traditions. You know nothing about our family, our values, our expectations." "Mom," Heather's voice was shocked, "that's completely inappropriate." Martha ignored her focus solely on me now. "If you go through with this, Caroline, you're turning your back on everything I've tried to build for this family. Everything I've sacrificed to give you a proper upbringing and social standing. I felt something inside me snap a lifetime of seeking approval, suddenly giving way to clarity. Is that what you think this is about, social standing? What will the country club think? Don't trivialize my concerns, Martha said coldly. This is about your future, your children's future, about maintaining the standards and traditions of this family. Your standards, I corrected. Your traditions, not mine. Not anymore. Martha set down her napkin with deliberate precision. Then I suppose you've made your choice. Yes, I said, surprising myself with my steadiness. I have. I choose Daniel. I choose happiness. I choose a life where I'm valued for who I am, not criticized for who I'm not. The table was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Martha's face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. When she spoke, her voice was ice. You're dead to me. The words hung in the air, shocking in their finality. Aunt Linda gasped. Uncle Robert's fork clattered against his plate. Heather let out a small, wounded sound. I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine. Time seemed to stretch each second, expanding into an eternity, as I processed what my mother had just said in front of our entire family on Christmas. Don't do this, Martha, Aunt Linda pleaded. She's your daughter. Martha's gaze never left mine. Not anymore. Not if she chooses him over her family. I'm not choosing him over family, I said quietly. I'm choosing a life without conditional love, without constant judgment, without having to earn basic respect. Am I family or not? I asked, echoing the question that had haunted me my entire life. Martha's silence was my answer. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched plate. Thank you for making this so clear after all these years. I turned to the rest of the table. I apologize for disrupting Christmas dinner. Please enjoy the rest of your meal. Daniel rose beside me, dignified in his silence. We walked out together, neither of us looking back, leaving behind a table frozen in shock at what had just transpired. It wasn't until we reached the car that the reality of what had happened hit me. My mother had disowned me, in front of everyone, on Christmas. Strangely, as Daniel started the car, and we pulled away from the house I had grown up in, I didn't feel the devastation I might have expected. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity, as if a fog had finally lifted. For the first time in my life, I was free of the need to earn my mother's approval. She had made her choice, and now I was free to make mine. The drive home from my mother's house to my apartment in Detroit was silent. Daniel kept glancing at me, clearly concerned, but understanding enough to give me space with my thoughts. The Christmas lights of suburban houses blurred past the window, each twinkling display a reminder of the family holiday I had just been effectively banished from. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I moved mechanically, hanging up my coat, kicking off my shoes, pouring a glass of water I didn't drink. Daniel watched me carefully, waiting for the breakdown he surely expected. Caroline, he finally said, his voice gentle. Talk to me. What are you feeling? I sat on the edge of my couch, trying to identify the storm of emotions inside me. I don't know. Shocked, I guess, but also relieved. Is that terrible? Daniel sat beside me, taking my cold hands in his warm ones. It's not terrible, it's honest. She disowned me, I said, testing the words. My own mother said I was dead to her, because of who I love, because I wouldn't conform to her vision of what my life should be. She was cruel, Daniel said simply. There's no justification for what she said. I nodded slowly. You know what's strange? Part of me has been waiting for this moment my entire life, waiting for her to finally say out loud what I've always felt, that her love was completely conditional, that I was only worthy as long as I did exactly what she wanted. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of my hand. What do you want to do now? It was a simple question, but it made me realize I was at a crossroads. I could try to repair the relationship, apologize, compromise my happiness to meet my mother's expectations. Or I could accept that this break might be permanent and find a way to move forward without her approval. I think I need to cut ties, I said, surprised by the certainty in my voice. Completely, at least for now. Daniel nodded. If that's what you need, I support you. I spent that night unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling as I replayed my mother's words over and over. You're dead to me. 4 words that severed what should have been the most fundamental bond in my life. By morning, I had a strange sense of calm, as if I'd passed through a storm and emerged changed on the other side. With methodical precision, I began the process of cutting Martha out of my life. I blocked her number on my phone. I removed her from all my social media accounts. I gathered the few belongings I had at her house and asked Heather to mail them to me. I returned the house key she had given me for emergencies, sending it in a padded envelope with no note. The hardest part was talking to Heather. I called her the day after Christmas, my heart pounding as I explained my decision. I understand if this puts you in an awkward position, I told her. I don't expect you to choose sides. Heather was quiet for a moment. It's not about sides, Car. It's about what Mom said. It was unforgivable. Maybe to you, I said, but she's still your mother, and she's always treated you differently. That's part of the problem, Heather admitted. I've watched how she treats you my whole life. I used to think it was normal or that maybe you were doing something wrong, but as we got older, I started to see it more clearly. She paused. What she said yesterday crossed a line even for her. Tyler and I left right after you did. Knowing I had my sister's support even in this limited way was a comfort I hadn't expected. But I was firm in my resolve. I need a clean break, Heather. No messages from her through you, no updates about my life going back to her. Can you respect that? Of course, she promised. But are you really okay? I considered the question honestly. Not yet, but I think I will be. The final step was writing a letter to Martha. I spent days drafting it, trying to find the right words to express what I was feeling without anger or bitterness. In the end, I kept it simple. Martha, your words at Christmas made your feelings clear, and I've decided to respect your position by removing myself from your life completely. I will not be contacting you again, and I ask that you extend the same courtesy to me. I hope someday you'll understand that love shouldn't come with conditions, and that your children's happiness should matter more than your own expectations. But whether that day comes or not, I need to live my life authentically. Caroline. I sent the letter by certified mail requiring a signature, so I would know she had received it. When the confirmation came, I felt a strange finality. The door to my childhood, to the desperate need for my mother's approval, had closed. What I didn't realize then was that this ending would become the beginning of the most authentic chapter of my life. In the months that followed my break with Martha, I discovered parts of myself that had been suppressed for years beneath the weight of her expectations. Without the constant voice in my head questioning my choices, criticizing my appearance, and comparing me unfavorably to others, I began to unfold like a flower finally receiving sunlight. Daniel and I planned our wedding for October, when the Michigan trees would be ablaze with fall colors. We chose a small art gallery for the ceremony and reception, a space with soaring ceilings and walls lined with contemporary paintings. The guest list was intimate: Daniel's large, warm family, my father and his wife flying in from California, Heather and Tyler, and a circle of close friends who had become my chosen family. I left an empty chair in the front row during the ceremony, a symbolic acknowledgement of Martha's absence. Not out of hope that she would appear at the last minute, but as a way of processing the loss. My father walked me down the aisle, his eyes misty as he kissed my cheek before placing my hand in Daniel's. "Your mother is missing something beautiful," he whispered. It was the only reference to her absence anyone made that day. The wedding was everything I had dreamed of. Artistic, intimate, filled with personal touches that reflected both our heritages. Daniel's mother had taught me to make traditional Persian rice with saffron, which we served alongside American comfort foods. We danced to a playlist that blended Western pop songs with Middle Eastern rhythms. When Daniel's entire family surrounded us on the dance floor, pulling us into a traditional circle dance, I felt a sense of belonging I had rarely experienced growing up. But the path to healing was not just about creating new memories to replace the painful ones. It was also about understanding the wounds that had shaped me. A month after the wedding, I started therapy seeking help to process not just the Christmas confrontation, but the lifetime of emotional abuse that had preceded it. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me see the patterns that had defined my relationship with Martha. What you've described is classic narcissistic parenting, she explained. The golden child scapegoat dynamic with your sister. The conditional love based on meeting impossible standards. The way your accomplishments were either dismissed or claimed as her success. Understanding that what I had experienced had a name that others had walked this path before me was oddly comforting. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't crazy for feeling damaged by a childhood that from the outside had looked privileged and secure. Through Dr. Chen, I found a support group for adult children of narcissistic parents. Sitting in a circle of strangers who nodded in recognition at my stories, who understood the specific pain of never being enough for a parent who should have loved me unconditionally, was a revelation. Some had maintained limited contact with their narcissistic parents, creating strict boundaries to protect themselves. Others, like me, had chosen to cut ties completely. "There's no single right answer," said Mia, a woman in her 40s who had been estranged from her father for over a decade. "The only question that matters is, what do you need to be healthy?" As I worked through my childhood trauma in therapy, I also began to rediscover the creative interests I had abandoned to please Martha. I took a painting class at the community arts center where Daniel sometimes taught. My first attempts were hesitant, constrained by decades of hearing that art was a waste of time, that I lacked talent, that practical pursuits were the only worthwhile endeavors. "You're holding the brush like you're afraid of it," Daniel observed during one session, "like you're waiting for someone to criticize you." His insight struck a chord. I was still painting for Martha's approval, still hearing her voice in my head. The realization was painful but necessary. Slowly, I learned to silence that internal critic, to paint for the joy of creation rather than for external validation. My career evolved as well. The marketing firm I worked for had a large client in the arts sector, and I asked to be assigned to their account. My writing, freed from the self-censorship I had internalized, became more authentic and creative. Within 6 months, I was promoted to creative director for the Arts and Culture Division. When Daniel received a prestigious fellowship at an arts institution in Minneapolis, we made the decision to relocate. The move felt symbolic, a physical distancing from the geography of my past, a fresh start in a city where no one knew me as Martha Walker's daughter. We found a loft in a converted warehouse, a space with high ceilings and huge windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. We painted the walls vibrant colors, hung art from floor to ceiling, and filled the space with plants and books and music. It was everything Martha would have hated: impractical, bohemian, expressive, and it felt more like home than anywhere I had ever lived. The first year of no contact was the hardest. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesday afternoons when a memory would surface unexpectedly. Each brought a fresh wave of grief for the mother I had never had, the relationship that had never been healthy. I learned to sit with the sadness without drowning in it, to acknowledge the loss without letting it define me. I developed new traditions to replace the old ones. Thanksgiving became a Friendsgiving potluck with other transplants to Minneapolis who couldn't or chose not to travel home for the holiday. Christmas evolved into a quiet celebration with Daniel, followed by a volunteer shift serving meals at a local shelter. Each year, we added new elements that felt meaningful to us, gradually building a life that honored both our backgrounds while creating something uniquely ours. As my healing progressed, I found myself thinking about motherhood, about the kind of parent I wanted to be if Daniel and I decided to have children. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying. What if I carried Martha's patterns inside me? What if the cycle of emotional abuse was too ingrained to break? "You're already breaking it," Dr. Chen assured me. "The awareness you have, the work you're doing. That's how generational trauma ends." I wanted to believe her, but the fear lingered. It wasn't until I discovered I was pregnant 2 years after cutting ties with Martha that I truly committed to the work of becoming a different kind of mother than the one I had known. I read books on secure attachment and gentle parenting. I joined a group for expectant parents focused on breaking generational trauma. And I continued my therapy now with an additional focus on how my childhood might impact my parenting. Throughout it all, Daniel was my steadfast support, never pushing me to reconcile with Martha for the sake of appearances, never suggesting that family ties should be preserved at the cost of my mental health. He understood in a way many couldn't, that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. While I was building this new life, I rarely thought about how Martha might be reacting to my absence. But occasional updates filtered through the family grapevine, usually via Heather, who still maintained contact with our mother while respecting my boundaries. What I learned surprised me. Martha's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble, revealing the consequences of her actions in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The first indication that my absence was affecting Martha came about 3 months after I had cut ties. Heather called me one evening, her voice hesitant. "Car, I thought you should know. Mom's been telling people you're taking some time to find yourself in Europe. When Aunt Linda mentioned seeing your wedding photos on my social media, Mom changed the subject completely." I wasn't surprised that Martha was creating a narrative that saved face. What did surprise me was when Heather continued, "Aunt Linda called me afterward. She said she knows exactly what happened at Christmas, and that Mom's version of events isn't fooling anyone." This was unexpected. Martha had always been skilled at managing her image, at ensuring that everyone saw her as the perfect mother doing her best with a difficult daughter. The idea that family members were seeing through the facade was a significant shift. 6 months after the estrangement, I received an email from my cousin Megan. We had been close as children, but had drifted apart as adults, our relationship reduced to Christmas cards and occasional likes on social media posts. "I need to apologize for not reaching out sooner," she wrote. "I was there at Christmas, I heard what Aunt Martha said to you, and I sat there in shock without saying a word. I should have stood up for you. We all should have." She went on to explain that the family had been discussing the incident among themselves. "There's been a real reckoning about how Aunt Martha has treated you over the years. Many of us noticed it but didn't say anything because, well, it wasn't our place. Now we realize that silence made us complicit." Megan's email was followed by similar messages from other family members. Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Each expressed regret for not intervening sooner, for accepting Martha's treatment of me as normal. It was a validation I hadn't realized I needed. Around the 8-month mark, Heather reported that Martha had tried to host her annual summer garden party, a social event she had orchestrated for years to showcase her perfect home, perfect garden, and by extension, her perfect life. "Half the usual guests declined," Heather told me, "and several who did attend asked about you directly in front of everyone. Mom was furious afterward." Martha's carefully cultivated social circle was beginning to question her narrative. The whispers had started fueled by my conspicuous absence from family gatherings and Martha's increasingly strained explanations. The most significant shift came nearly a year after our estrangement, when Heather and Tyler announced their engagement. Martha immediately launched into planning mode, eager to orchestrate the perfect wedding for her remaining daughter. "She's driving me crazy," Heather confessed during one of our weekly calls. "Every decision has to be run by her, from the color of the napkins to the font on the invitations. Tyler and I want something small and personal, but she's pushing for a country club wedding with 200 guests." 2 weeks later, Heather called again, her voice a mixture of shock and something like awe. "You won't believe what just happened. I told Mom that if she couldn't respect our wishes for our wedding, we would elope. And when she didn't back down, I said that I was starting to understand exactly why you cut ties with her." There was a long pause before Heather continued. "She looked like I'd slapped her car. She actually asked me if I thought she was a bad mother. For the first time ever, I told her the truth, that the way she treated you was emotional abuse, and that I'm only starting to understand how damaging it was because I was the golden child." It was a confrontation I couldn't have imagined Heather having the courage for even a year earlier. My sister, who had always been the peacekeeper, the one who went along to get along, was finding her voice, and in doing so, she was holding Martha accountable in a way I never could have. The most unexpected development came shortly after Heather's confrontation. Martha, faced with the prospect of potentially losing her relationship with her second daughter, scheduled an appointment with a family therapist. "She claims she wants to understand," Heather told me, skepticism clear in her voice. "I'm not getting my hopes up, but it's something I never thought I'd see." I received this news with mixed emotions. On one hand, I was glad that Martha was seeking help, especially if it meant she might treat Heather better. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of bitterness that it had taken the threat of losing both daughters to prompt this step, when my pain alone had never been enough. As Martha's social facade crumbled and her relationship with Heather became strained, she began to experience the natural consequences of her behavior. Friends who had witnessed her cutting remarks over the years began to distance themselves. Family members who had once deferred to her out of respect or fear now challenged her versions of events. The carefully constructed identity of the perfect mother with the perfect family was disintegrating. Martha's health began to suffer. Heather reported that she had developed high blood pressure and insomnia, physical manifestations of the stress she was experiencing. "She's lost weight," Heather said, "and not in a good way. She looks diminished somehow." I felt no joy in hearing this. Despite everything, I didn't want Martha to suffer. I simply wanted to protect myself from further harm. The news of her decline brought a complicated mix of emotions: concern, vindication, guilt, and a deep sadness for what could have been. Then on my 30th birthday, nearly 18 months after the Christmas confrontation, a letter arrived from Martha. I recognized her handwriting immediately, the precise, controlled script that had signed countless school permission slips and birthday cards with measured affection. For days, the letter sat unopened on our kitchen counter. Daniel didn't push me to read it, understanding my hesitation. "Whatever decision you make about that letter is valid," he assured me. "You don't owe her a response or even reading it." When I finally gathered the courage to open the envelope, what I found inside was something I had never received from Martha before: an apology. "Caroline," she wrote, "I have been attending therapy for the past 6 months at first to try to understand why both my daughters were pulling away from me. What I've come to realize with considerable pain and resistance is that I have been the source of the problem all along." The letter continued for several pages, acknowledging specific incidents from my childhood and young adulthood, where she had been critical, dismissive, or manipulative. She recognized the damage her conditional love had caused, and the words she had spoken at that Christmas dinner. "There is no excuse for telling my child she is dead to me," she wrote. "Those words came from a place of fear and control, not love. A mother's love should be unconditional, and mine was anything but." She ended the letter, not with a request for reconciliation, but with a simple acknowledgement: "I don't expect this letter to repair what I've broken. I only want you to know that I am finally facing the truth about myself and my failures as a mother. You deserved better, and I am truly sorry that I couldn't be the mother you needed." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't a perfect apology. There were moments of self-justification woven throughout, references to her own difficult childhood, explanations of the pressures she had felt as a single mother. But it was more self-awareness than I had ever witnessed from her, and it seemed genuine. What struck me most was that she wasn't asking for anything. There was no manipulation, no guilt trip, no expectation that her apology would erase the past. It was perhaps for the first time a communication that was about my needs rather than hers. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took the letter to my next therapy session, where Dr. Chen helped me process my complicated feelings about this unexpected development. "An apology doesn't obligate you to reconciliation," she reminded me. "That's a separate decision, one that should be based on what's healthy for you now, not on obligation or guilt." For weeks, I contemplated how to respond, if at all. The distance and time had been healing for me. I had built a life I loved with a partner who supported me unconditionally. I was expecting our first child, growing a small life inside me that represented hope and a new beginning. Did I want to reintroduce Martha into this carefully constructed piece? The answer wasn't simple, and it wouldn't come quickly. What I did know was that Martha's letter marked a significant shift. For the first time, she was experiencing the consequences of her actions, facing the reality of the damage she had caused. And in doing so, she was taking the first steps toward the kind of accountability that might someday make a different kind of relationship possible. But whether that relationship would ever exist was a decision I wasn't ready to make. For now, I would continue on the path of healing, focusing on the life I was building and the family Daniel and I were creating. Martha's journey toward self-awareness would have to continue in parallel to mine's separate, but perhaps someday reconcilable. What I couldn't have anticipated was how this painful break would ultimately lead to transformation for both of us, in ways neither could have imagined on that fateful Christmas night. 3 years passed from the night my mother told me I was dead to her. In that time, my life transformed in ways I could never have predicted. Daniel and I welcomed our daughter Lily, a spirited child with her father's artistic temperament and her mother's determination. We bought a small house in a vibrant Minneapolis neighborhood with a backyard garden and a studio space we converted from the garage. My career flourished as I embraced my creative instincts, eventually starting my own boutique marketing agency, specializing in arts organizations. Throughout these years, I continued my journey of healing. Therapy, both individual and group, remained a cornerstone of my personal growth. I joined a parenting group specifically for those breaking generational trauma, where we supported each other through the challenges of raising children differently than we had been raised. Most importantly, I learned to parent myself with the compassion and acceptance I had never received as a child. Martha's letter on my 30th birthday had remained unanswered for months as I processed my feelings about her apology. When I finally responded, it was with a brief note acknowledging her letter and expressing appreciation for her willingness to examine her behavior. I made no promises about reconciliation, but left the door slightly ajar by sharing my new address in Minneapolis. Over the next 2 years, Martha continued her therapy. She sent occasional updates through cards on my birthday and Christmas, each respectful of my boundaries, none asking for or expecting a response. Through Heather, I learned that Martha had joined a support group for parents estranged from adult children, where she was confronting hard truths about her parenting. "She's different," Heather reported after a visit home. "Still Martha in many ways. She'll probably always be a perfectionist. But she actually listened when I talked about my wedding plans instead of taking over. And when I mentioned you, she asked how you were doing without making it about her." These small changes reported secondhand weren't enough to prompt me to resume contact, but they did allow me to begin considering what a future relationship might look like if Martha could consistently demonstrate real change. The catalyst came unexpectedly when Lily was 18 months old. Daniel received an offer for a major exhibition at a prestigious gallery in Detroit, a career-defining opportunity we couldn't refuse. After much discussion, we decided to relocate back to Michigan, though, to Ann Arbor, rather than Detroit itself, giving us some geographical distance from Martha, while still being close enough for Daniel's work. Once we had settled into our new home, I found myself contemplating the possibility of limited contact with Martha. Lily was growing, becoming aware of extended family through Daniel's parents and siblings, who visited regularly. She knew Aunt Heather from video calls and occasional visits when Heather traveled to Minneapolis. But she had no concept of a maternal grandmother, a fact that brought both relief and a strange sorrow. After extensive discussions with Daniel and Dr. Chen, I decided to test the waters with a controlled meeting. I suggested a public place, a cafe in Birmingham neutral territory for both of us, and asked Heather to be present as support. I made it clear that this was not a guarantee of ongoing contact, merely an opportunity to assess whether Martha's claimed changes were genuine. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, settling my nerves with a cup of herbal tea and deep breathing exercises. When Martha entered the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. The immaculately coiffed, carefully controlled woman of my childhood had been replaced by someone who looked human. Her hair was styled more simply, her makeup less perfect, her clothing still elegant but less rigid. But it was the uncertainty in her expression that truly surprised me. Martha Walker uncertain was something I had never witnessed. "Caroline," she said, her voice catching slightly, "thank you for agreeing to this." Heather arrived moments later, completing our small tense circle. For the first hour, conversation remained superficial. Talk of the weather, my new home in Ann Arbor, Daniel's upcoming exhibition. I shared a few photos of Lily on my phone, which Martha looked at with visible emotion, but made no presumptuous comments about being a grandmother. Eventually, the conversation turned to the reason we were there. "I've been working very hard in therapy," Martha said, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. "I've had to confront a lot of painful truths about myself and the way I parented you." She went on to explain the insights she had gained, about how her own mother's critical perfectionism had shaped her, about how her fear of inadequacy had manifested as control, about how she had used Heather and me to fulfill her own needs rather than seeing us as individuals with our own paths. None of that excuses what I did, she added quickly, especially what I said that Christmas. I want you to know that those words have haunted me every day since. What struck me most was that Martha seemed genuinely different. The old Martha would have made the conversation about her pain, her growth, her journey. This Martha asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. She expressed interest in Daniel's art without judgment. She acknowledged Heather's perspectives without defensive responses. When the topic turned to difficult memories, she didn't deny or justify, but simply said, "I'm sorry, you deserved better." At the end of our 2-hour meeting, Martha thanked me for the opportunity to see me. "I would very much like to be part of your life again, Caroline, but I understand that has to be on your terms. Whatever boundaries you need, I will respect them." I left that meeting cautiously optimistic, but still protective of my hard-won peace. Over the following months, we established a careful, limited relationship. We met for coffee once a month, always in public places, often with Heather present. I set clear boundaries: no unannounced visits, no unsolicited advice, no comments about my appearance or lifestyle choices. To my surprise, Martha respected these limits without complaint. 6 months into this tentative reconnection, I felt secure enough to introduce Lily to her grandmother. We met at a children's museum neutral territory, where Lily could play and interact naturally. Martha was visibly nervous, a stark contrast to the confident, controlling grandmother I might have expected years ago. "What should she call me?" Martha asked, uncertain. "I think Martha is fine for now," I said gently but firmly. "We can revisit that as our relationship develops." Martha nodded, accepting this boundary without protest, another sign of real change. Throughout the afternoon, she followed my lead with Lily never overstepping asking permission before offering a snack or suggesting an activity. When Lily had a small tantrum over leaving a favorite exhibit, Martha made no judgmental comments about my parenting, merely stepped back and let me handle it. As we were leaving, Martha said something that confirmed the depth of her transformation. "You're an excellent mother, Caroline. The way you listen to Lily, the patience you show. You're giving her exactly what I couldn't give you. I'm so proud of you for breaking that cycle." Those words, spoken with genuine admiration, rather than the backhanded compliments of the past, meant more than any apology could have. Over the next year, our relationship continued to evolve. Martha remained consistent in respecting my boundaries, even as those boundaries gradually relaxed. We established new traditions: monthly family dinners where Martha was a guest rather than the controller, holiday celebrations where everyone's preferences were honored. She built a relationship with Daniel based on mutual respect, taking a genuine interest in his art and cultural background. Most importantly, Martha proved herself trustworthy with Lily. She never undermined my parenting, never tried to create the golden child scapegoat dynamic that had defined my childhood, never used Lily as a way to regain control. Instead, she became a supportive presence, a grandmother who understood that her role was to enhance, not direct our family life. Was it perfect? No. There were missteps and moments of tension, old patterns that threatened to reemerge under stress. But the difference was that now Martha could recognize when she was falling into those patterns and step back. And I had the strength and clarity to address issues directly, rather than retreating into people-pleasing or resentful compliance. The mother-daughter relationship we have today is not what I imagined as a child desperately seeking approval that never came. It's not the automatic, unquestioning forgiveness that society often pressures estranged children to offer. Instead, it's a carefully constructed adult relationship based on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and the acknowledgement of past harm alongside present growth. Martha and I will never have the easy closeness some mothers and daughters enjoy. Too much damage was done, too many formative years lost. But we have something that in many ways is more valuable: an authentic connection built on truth, rather than performance, on real acceptance, rather than conditional approval. Looking back on that Christmas night when my mother's words froze the room, I realized that "you're dead to me" marked both an ending and a beginning. It was the death of an unhealthy dynamic, a necessary rupture that allowed both of us to rebuild ourselves and eventually our relationship. The girl who left that Christmas dinner in tears, who methodically cut ties with the mother who had caused so much pain, could never have imagined where this path would lead. She couldn't have foreseen the freedom that would come from walking away, the strength that would grow in the absence of constant criticism, or the possibility that both she and her mother might someday change enough to find a new way forward. What I've learned through this journey is that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is draw a line and say no more. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for health and healing. That forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, but when genuine change occurs on both sides, new relationships can emerge from the ashes of broken ones. Most importantly, I've learned that my worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it, not even my mother's. I am whole and valuable exactly as I am worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions worthy of respect, that doesn't have to be earned through compliance. If you're struggling with toxic family relationships, know that you deserve better. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most loving choice you can make is to walk away even from family. It might be the beginning of healing for everyone involved.